their microphone when they're not speaking. And we have apologies from June Brown, Sandra McLeod and Shona Omand-Smith. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Again, welcome to this meeting. Let's start with item 1.1. Are there any declarations of interest or transparency statements? Nope. Okay. There is no exempt business. The minute of our previous meeting, the 9th of August, has been circulated. Is it an accurate record? Are we happy to approve that minute? Yes, great. That minute's approved. The business planner is at 3.2. So yep. Maybe the clerk, yeah, if you could help us, please, through the business planner.
I'll go through the business planner, yeah. Chair, if that's okay. Yeah. The first, from lines 5 to 11, they're all covered on the agenda. There was 2 items to be removed. The whistleblowing update, there's no incidents since the last quarter, and Audit Scotland is now just going to be a briefing sent out to members. There's 2 reports that have been delayed. We're waiting for a response from the Children and Young Persons Mental Welfare Commission to do the CAMS report, and the SDS report, we're waiting for some clarity on what was actually requested there, so we'll defer that to the next meeting. And the final 3 are being removed. The 2 of them for the audit of the accounts and the workforce plan, they went to the last IJB, so that was doubling up coming to this committee. And the last report is actually covered, now incorporated into the delivery plan. Okay. There's one other report I noticed, it's a way down, it's on line 40. It's the audited accounts for next year. So that's still on there. It was just copied forward before we decided to remove the account, so that'll come off as well on line 40.
Okay. Thank you for that. I think that's very clear and straightforward. Are there any questions on the business planner? No, that's great. Thank you. Then we move on to the directions tracker at 4.1.
Yep, that's me again, I'm afraid.
Yes, please.
Most of the trackers are all green. They're all incorporated into the current year budgets. But you'll see at the bottom there's 1 amber and 2 reds. The 2 reds are covered by, or will be brought up at reports that are going to the next IJB. So that'll answer those ones. And the amber one is about the immunisation clinic. So it is progressing, but it's just in case that if the deadlines are brought forward, that might cause a problem with lack of staff. That's why we've kept it as amber.
Okay. I think it's relatively impressive that there are only 2 reds and 1 amber in that very long list of important activities. So that's encouraging and positive. John.
Yes, just a comment. There's, I think the work that's been done on this and what comes forward to us is crystal clear. So I commend the clarity of it, and yes, good to see the actual content and where we are with it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So are we content to note the report and the updates in the appendix? We're okay with that. That's great. Let's move on. Thank you. Anyone who's raised a hand can always take it down after the session, after that item is finished. Thank you. The strategic risk register at 5.1.
Yes, morning, Chair. I'll introduce that. So yeah, the committee has a report which presents the most up-to-date version of the strategic risk register, which contains a deeper dive on the risk relating to finances and workforce. So attached to the report is the revised version of the strategic risk register, with the strategic risks on finance and workforce having been updated since the meeting of the IJB in October. Just a reminder for the committee that the purpose of the strategic risk register is to provide the IJB with assurance that it's able to deliver the organisation's strategic objectives and goals. And then following the meeting of the IJB in October, I have met with the risk owners for both the financial and workforce risks to kind of go through some of the issues they want to raise in front of the committee, and they're summarised in the report. But I will ask them to summarise their thoughts on the risk just in a minute, and then afterwards members have the opportunity to ask questions, but also to get that kind of confirmation of their assurance that the controls and mitigating actions outlined in the report and by the risk owners are sufficient. So I'll hand over to Paul, first of all, who's going to talk about the financial risk, and then we'll hear from Sandy in relation to the workforce risk. So I'll hand over to Paul. Thank you.
Thank you. The risk for the finance, there was no change in the level of risk. We've kept it at high, but our biggest funding issues, obviously funded from the city and the NHS. So obviously with knock-on pressures that they're having, we might end up having funding issues coming from them, but we're still working through our MTFF and our budget planning. We're building on assuming that flatline cash, but we've still to hear back from those two bodies what our funding allocation is going to be for next year. So we are monitoring monthly. Obviously, we regular reports go to the SLT. There's quarterly reports. The next quarterly reports going to the IJB next week, or in a fortnight, sorry. So we are monitoring regularly to make sure that if there is any shortfalls, we answer them as quick as we can.
Thank you for that. The finance risk will remain high, I'm sure, for the foreseeable future. So are there those ongoing discussions with the City Council finance team just to make sure that in this very, very dynamic, changing environment that we're getting all the information that we need to give some certainty?
Yes, yeah, there's regular meetings between myself and the finance, and also with the NHS finance as well. So yeah. And like I said, we build that into our budget going forward. So the budget's coming to the IJB, I think it's in February or March. So we're working on that for just now. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. John Tomlinson.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. So on the pressures here, and later on in the agenda, we've got the PSET report, and the reserves are going to need to be put against that. So the wriggle room that we had is diminishing or gone. So we have so it's a question. We have a pot of money which comes from the two sources, and we need to work within that. If we've got pressures, we don't have any more wriggle room. We've basically got to reduce our expenditure through efficiency or cuts. So first question is just to confirm that's our position, and then the second complementary to that is, are we going to be in that situation where we need to think about service reduction? And the reason I'm asking that is the longer we take before we make a decision, if it's in year, the more difficult the decision. It's going to be difficult anyway. And I also ask it because I know other IJBs are in the process of looking at how they cut services.
Yeah, yes is the answer to the first one. So we could have a shortfall, and they might have to make savings. But what we've also got is within the reserves, we've got the integration and change for any transformational projects. So if we can make any savings through transformational programs, we've got the reserve that we can use within that for a couple of years to then build in the savings going forward.
Okay. Sorry, so that's our wriggle room, if you like.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
Okay, and are we considering even if it's as a safeguard, where we would go for any reductions if it came to it, or do we not think that's going to be necessary?
That hasn't been to the SLT. Yeah, I'm still working on this, and I think the plan is to take that to the December SLT to then go forward with some ideas and suggestions then.
Okay, so that would come back to this committee in the new year.
Yeah.
Okay, I think in terms of the minute, Chair, we should ask for specifically that happens if there are any plans.
Okay. Thanks for that. Could I kind of ask as a follow-up? There is planned a review of the risk register. I think that planned for next spring, first quarter of next financial year. Will that be an opportunity to go over these potential cost pressures, impacts, and so forth? Can anyone help with that question?
Yeah, you're right, Chair, that the IGB asked for an additional review of the strategic risk register 6 months after its workshop, which was in August. So I think maybe if I work with Emma around scheduling that in about exactly when the committee would be seeing that. So possibly the first meeting in the new year, but ahead of that, I think it would be good to sense check the register with the IGB members and set up some kind of similar workshop that we had in August, just to get thoughts, etc., so that people are informed. And then when it comes to the committee, we can look at the detail and a bit more scrutiny and that. So I'll liaise with Emma to see if we can get that sorted.
Okay, that's helpful. I think we're going to have to keep up to date with that. John Cook.
Thanks. Yeah, and if Paul could just confirm my understanding, looking ahead to 2023-24 budgeting, the money that the council gets for IJB purposes, that is ring fenced specifically for the IJB and couldn't be used for anything else.
Yeah, we get funding allocations for things like the real living wage, etc., which come in, and the council are basically the bankers, and they just passport the money across to us. It's the same. Some of the funding comes in via the NHS, some comes in via the council. It's because we cannot receive the money ourselves, so it comes in via one of those partners and just gets passported across.
Thanks.
Thank you, Luann.
Thank you. So my question is given that we're going into more pressured financial times coming up, do we need to be thinking just now about how we protect our prevention, early intervention spend? Because obviously that's the first place historically that cuts would be made. And if we're to deliver on our strategic intent, we want to make sure that our prevention activities are protected and maintained. So I just wondered if there's been thought, Paul, at SLT about, do we need to put something around our prevention activities, or, to make sure that we just don't repeat mistakes that have been made in the past in other boards around this?
Yeah, it will be, like I said, I haven't been to the SLT with a draft budget and where we are, because what I've done is I've basically based the budget going forward on last year's MTFF. So I've just carried it forward for this year and then adjusting for known knowns so far. But I haven't been to the SLT yet. Like I said, it was planned to go there for the December meeting, because but all these things obviously will be spoken through. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a good point, because the preventative agenda is quite strongly demonstrated through the annual performance report, and there's some really good work that's been going on there that we need to continue into the next strategic plan activity. So thanks for that. Do we have any other questions about the risk register?
So, Chair, it was just an opportunity maybe for the committee to hear from Sandy on the workforce risk and get questions as well.
Okay. Sandy.
Thank you, Chair. I thought maybe just give a kind of quick context to remind us all where we're at, and then what I was happy to do would be answer questions or based on the sort of the risk register in front of people. So the workforce risk remains very high. And I think, I guess I was thinking of a few things we will all understand and have lived with, where our health and social care staff are 2 years into living with and dealing with a COVID pandemic. If those staff were here, they would all say they are exhausted. They do not see a light at the end of the tunnel. We're sitting here today ahead of what we see every night on the news this week, and Scottish News, BBC and STV, we start with, this is going to be the worst winter ever. And that's not to say that's incorrect, but that's the context that people are hearing and living. We're also on the verge of, without getting into ins and outs of it, likely to be industrial action, which was likely to include, from an organisation's response, asking people to have to move and to support other colleagues to fill other spaces, if you like, and work in other places. And I think across society, and this is not just related to the health and social care system, but it definitely impacts on us significantly. You know, our biggest chunk of our workforce are over 50. And I think there's a societal thing that many people will recognise about, you know, people have reflected over the COVID period and considered, do they want to carry on working? Can they afford to stop working? Can they afford to reduce the hours of their working? And all those things, there's no not kind of one thing specifically. If you add all of those things up together, I think it gives you an indication of why the kind of, in my mind, subject to discussion, obviously, that I think we're still at a very high risk in terms of workforce. So I think rather than describe the detail of what you've got in the report, because people have read that, I'm happy to answer questions or comments or hear counter suggestions from across the committee, Chair, if that's okay.
Okay. Thanks very much for that, Sandy. So questions, John Tomlinson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just on, clearly, you know, the pressure's there and looks like it's going to continue for some time. I suppose it's this thing between firefighting and I think, you know, 315, just trying to get through day by day almost, and those mechanisms to do that, as opposed to a workforce plan that's coming. And I know we'll be looking at that at the IJB itself, so I'm not trying to get into that too prematurely, but from the point of view of a risk, I'm comparing the firefighting to getting to the root causes and having a plan out of it, which would require the kind of modelling on recruitment and retention. So is that going to come through for us in the in the workforce plan, specifically modelling where the gaps are and what the interventions are to try and close those gaps, so that we're dealing with the root causes of the risk as opposed to mitigating and ameliorating the symptoms?
I think probably my answer to that is that the specific type of modelling that you're describing won't be and isn't in the current draft that's circulating around for IGB consultation. Trying to interpret what you mean by modelling, I'm just kind of trying to interpret that, John.
Yeah, what I mean is basically what the need is compared to what we've got and what the gap is and how we can close that gap of numbers of people.
Again, I think the plan in my mind's eye just now, it's less about saying this is this and this is this and the gap is this. I think what we're trying to describe in the plan is, maybe answer it slightly differently, to try to move people's thinking as much as we can away from the day-to-day pressure of what I just described as the kind of crisis of that I just introduced with, but to think about, in my mind, for example, shifting our collective focus more towards retention and thinking, what is it that makes Martin feel valued in this organisation today? What is it that makes people Martin want to stay in this, sorry Martin, but to stay in the organisation? What do we need to do to retain and keep Martin, and to have those, you're starting to see people almost describing, what do we need to do to keep you to stay interview, stay focus, like, rather than an exit interview, why have you chosen to leave? I think I would also pick up the point, it wasn't made in this context. I'm not trying to kind of Luann wasn't saying this, but I think the example of investment and effort and energy around staff well-being is an interesting example of the kind of some of the stuff that I think Luann was alluding to, because that you could take a view that says, actually, we have got this big hole in this big crisis today at 10:20, and this is what we need to focus our energy on, rather than what should we be doing to try to keep people's well-being and at the same level, and ideally increase it and improve it. So I think the plan is trying to balance the two things, where we have got an immediate crisis, and but we know we can't recruit easily anywhere in the health and social care system in Aberdeen, Grampian, Scotland. So what more can we do to keep people feeling this is a good organisation to work in. And I guess I was writing down, thinking some thoughts beforehand. If you think of the example, if you think of the often used example about a meal, if I think this is a good organisation to work for, I'm going to tell 7 people, and if I don't, the opposite will be the case. And trying to move that thought process and be positive and to say this is a good organisation to work in, despite what I just said at the start of the meeting, which is a sort of contextual and a risk register set of context, to say this is a really, really good organisation to work for and remain in, and try to kind of move more towards that type of thinking. I don't know if that answers the question. I'm trying to kind of interpret a few things there.
Yeah. Can I come back, Martin?
Yes, please do.
Yeah. No, I think it's just to tease that out, and I'm hugely respectful of the position that people are in. So I'm being quite just looking at it from the point of view of what you've described as lifting ahead from the immediate getting through today to how do we motivate people for and be positive for the next year. But that bit that you said about the light at the end of the tunnel is about root causes getting dealt with, and I appreciate that might be a 5-year, 10-year project to bring people through training, etc. But if nobody's actually attending to that, we don't get there. So I suppose in terms of the risk, we can ameliorate it, but can we see a fix on the horizon? And I suppose that's my question. If the workforce plan's not doing that, is anybody out there?
If I came back, Chair, I mean, I think if I took an example, if I went to my sexual health service that I manage and I said to them, what should we be doing? What should we be focusing on in our workforce plan or to support your well-being? The simple answer they would say is, we just need more staff, Sandy, and we need more of them and more of them and more of them, and that's correct. That would be kind of from their perspective, the correct answer. So we are working with a lot of this is with, bear in mind, we're not an employer, so we're working with NHSG and where it's relevant ACC to try to significantly increase our recruitment, if you like, activities, increase how many more people will consider coming to work in Aberdeen. So we are doing those things, the kind of harder edge stuff. It probably would be fair to say, that when I'm describing this just now, that would probably be by a long way the most common answer that people say, what is the root cause of all of this? If you asked everybody in the partnership, John would just say, we just need more staff. That's kind of what they would say the root cause is. Just recruit more staff. And partly what I've been trying to say to them is, well, we are trying, that's one, but B, it's not easy and it might be impossible to recruit some of those staff. So what can we do to keep people that are here as well as trying to recruit more staff?
Yeah, no, sorry, Martin, and I totally understand and respect that. That's great. I suppose it's both and, it's not either or. So you're doing that, and then it's also on the horizon, what's this other thing? And I think it would be helpful, and maybe this, ahead of the IJB, where we can get into it in more detail, it's just, it might not be us, but is it somebody who's attending to that part? And if they're not, then the risk is going to continue and maybe escalate.
Thank you. Martin, were you going to come in on this point?
I was, thank you, Chair. It's just very briefly to say, obviously the workforce plan, once we've got that approved, and currently in the risk register we have that down as an assurance. So what myself and Sandy need to do is, once the workforce plan is approved, is take out the actions that we can and put them into update the strategic risk register with deadlines, etc. And I think that will hopefully help what John was talking about, some of the immediate stuff that we can do, but then the longer term stuff as well. But I think once approved, we've got an opportunity to take the detail out of the plan and update the risk, and hopefully that will provide the assurance that the committee is looking for, short term, medium term, long term as well.
Thank you for that. Thanks. That does give some reassurance. John Cook next.
Thanks, Martin. I mean, actually, a lot of what I wanted to discuss has actually just been covered in that exchange there, because it strikes me that retention and staff well-being is pretty critical, because I think if you look on a kind of historic basis, we've always had a problem in recruiting in health and social care in the Northeast compared to the overall position in Scotland as a whole. If you look at, for example, GPs on a kind of 10-year timescale, We have got a few more GPs in Scotland than there were 10 years ago, but it's going the other way. It's going down in the northeast. So given that we've got a problem with recruitment, I think, as I say, I think retention is a critical issue, not least because, again, certainly in Aberdeen City, but I think across the northeast more generally, if you listen to, for example, Aberdeen and Grampian Chamber of Commerce, they are also, all the firms and other organisations in our area are also facing staffing problems. So I think hanging on to the folk that we've got is going to be absolutely critical, certainly in the short term. Actually, probably in the short, medium, and long term, to be honest. So I think the emphasis on well-being, and I totally get what Sandy says around we actually just need more people, but it's vital that we hold on to the people we've got and make them feel valued. So yeah, that was it really. Sorry, it was more of a comment than a question because the question had really been answered previously.
No, that's fine. That's helpful. Thanks for that. Luann.
Thanks. And just for information for John Tomlinson, the query about modelling data has been raised, and I know Stuart Lamberton, who's all around the workforce plan, is looking at what's possible to put in. So I think we'll see what we get in the final version, and then what we need to build on from what we've got currently. I think part of the challenge is that the data is not readily available, particularly with a lot of our services being commissioned externally. So, but he's aware of our ask around that. So I think it's about, let's see what we get, and then let's give comment and steer as to what else we want and what can come through in the delivery plan. So being able to be more explicit, for example, about if we do all this really good work around retention, what's our hope? What's our idea of the numbers of people that will stay in the workplace for an extra 5 years or whatever? How does digital help us reduce pressure on workforce in certain areas, and just try and make it more tangible around numbers? So so John, yeah, the ask has been made, and we'll just see where we go from seeing the strategy at the IJB.
Great. Thank you for that. So any further questions or comments on the risk register? I think it's absolutely correct to highlight that pressure in terms of workforce. I'm pretty certain that that employees do feel valued, that it is a very positive employment environment. There's a very strong positive culture, and I think that's something to celebrate, and maybe to raise awareness that the input from staff is hugely valued and helps to make a difference for so many vulnerable people across the area. So that's great. So that's the strategic risk register. Happy to note, and we've done the deeper dive questions. Okay, let's move on then to the internal audit update report at 6.1. Is that yourself? Yeah. Thanks. That's you, Jamie. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Public sector internal audit standards require that we provide the committee with regular updates. This report satisfies that requirement, and I'd like to use this format for each session of the committee going forward. In one single report, I'll provide an update on the status of the internal audit plan, summaries of internal audit reports presented to the committee, and then an update on the follow-up of recommendations. I'll then use the report to present the committee with any other relevant information since my last update. And in this instance, we have the planned update on the internal audit planning. With regards to the actual contents of the report, you'll see from the internal audit progress section that we continue to progress our internal audit work. We've completed the care management review, which is presented to the committee today. With regards to transformational programme, that is with management, and it will definitely be presented to the next committee. And I'm also confident that we will be able to present our IJB data sharing also to the next committee. and our final review, which is adults with incapacity, that is scheduled for later in the year. With regards to the follow-up of recommendations, over the past months, my team has led an exercise to work with management, and this has been on outstanding actions. And if I could use this opportunity to thank staff for their engagement with us. As at the 30th of June, which was the baseline for our exercise, 10 audit recommendations were due for the IJB and the Health and Social Care Partnership. And through our engagement, we've closed off 9, leaving only 1 outstanding. And then finally from me, you've got an overview of the audit planning process, which began this month. Thank you, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you for introducing that paper, Jamie. Do members have questions on 6.1? Okay, so we're happy to note that paper. Okay, thank you very much. Next, the Care Management Internal Audit Report. That's yourself again, Jamie, I think.
Thank you, Chair. The original objective of this audit was to obtain assurance over the coordination, recording and payment for care services. However, at the request of management, due to reprioritisation of resources by the Health and Social Care Partnership and Council staff, it was not possible to carry out a full in-depth review as planned. This was to support an external care inspection and to implement a new care management system. Instead, it was agreed and then delivered to review plans and progress with the implementation of the new system and to obtain assurance that these are adequately cover the risks in respect of care management, recording and payments. I'm pleased to report that such assurance has been attained from digital and technology colleagues over the project, its implementation and the plans overall for the new care management system. We were able to gain evidence of governance and program management processes in place. I think there's a lot more work to do on this, and further assurance over the new arrangements in practice will be obtained through a planned internal audit of the new care management system in the following year. Thank you and welcome any questions.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Jamie. You mentioned in this report just now and in the previous about the new digital data processing, and I believe that there's some fairly revolutionary work that's been going on with information management, which would obviously lead to much more efficient procedures, would help with the practical work of care management. Is that notable? Has that been discovered? These changes, these improvements in digital processing, is that something for us to be, to really celebrate?
Thank you, Chair. I'd welcome the service to maybe provide any comments. From our perspective, we looked at the plans in place to reach that position, and that was certainly there. But from the future review, which is planned for next year, I would hope to be able to bring those assurances to the committee.
Okay. Thank you. John Tomlinson.
Yeah, just on this point of the assurance, new systems like this are notorious for not working out as planned. So you've got the audit on the plans. I'm just wondering to what extent the audit was able to sort of get into the risks around, and basically the learning that there is from many systems that have taken longer, have cost more, have not worked. So you end up with 70% of the functionality that was originally planned, etc. And that there was a real risks. Was that part of the considerations?
Through yourself, Chair, and thank you for the question. Yes, it absolutely was, and we were able to take assurances. Obviously, things can not go to plan, but from what we've seen, that wasn't the case. When this report was presented to the Council Audit Risk and Scrutiny Committee in the previous month, the service gave an update to that effect. I think there's been a slight delay of 1 month with regards to the go live date, but nothing else was noted as part of the service update or through our audit that would raise concern.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. John Cook.
Thanks. It's a fairly minor point in terms of the the original timescale for this was going to be sooner. Everything looks fine now. There's mention in the report that the delay was due to reprioritization. Would that have been COVID related, or would it have been other stuff?
Through yourself, Chair, and thank you for your question, Councillor. Yes, again, if the service are able to provide an update, but when we planned to scope the audit, the service spoke to us, and it was still the impact of COVID and the fallout from that, and because they knew they were implementing the new care system. So if we would have went ahead with the audit, we maybe wouldn't have had all engagement that we needed. So I'd be able to provide the committee with less assurance. So I hope you welcome that we were flexible in the plan. We took this approach, and then we'll do a full review in the following year.
No, that's helpful. I think the flexibility aspect is really good. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think in addition, there was also an external inspection which had an impact on this audit as well. So we had to look at moving resources around to make sure that we were adhering to that inspection as well. So, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So we're happy to note that report. That's great.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that. The review of financial regulations at 6.3.
Yeah,
Paul.
that's me again, Chair. Yeah, this is our annual review of the financial regulations. These regulations sit with us, but we've also obviously got the ones for the city and the NHS that we follow. But there's only minor changes in this one. There was a change for the committee name. The Risk Audit Performance Committee changed throughout the report. And on paragraph 5.6.2, there was mention of the insurance was being sought previously while we're applying for membership. We've now got that, so we've just tweaked that slightly. But there's been no major changes.
Okay, I think any questions on the financial regs? Okay, yeah, John Cook.
Yeah, just a very, very minor one. In terms of the clinical negligence and other risks scheme, presume there is a cost to us being members of that. But if we weren't members of that and said, can we save this cost? It's a bit like not having household insurance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think the cost from memory is about £3,000. Yeah.
And the potential, so there's a potential big hit if you're not insured and something goes wrong.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, good point. Thank you. So financial regs are approved. Everybody happy to approve that? Great. Next is the strategic delivery plan dashboard for
and that's myself,
that's
Chair.
Okay.
Thanks. So the this report provides the latest update in terms of progress against our delivery plan projects and the performance indicators in the form of the dashboard. Our approach to performance reporting is developing. We've removed the colour-coded boxes on the dashboard, which indicated project progress, and we've replaced that with the text update in the second appendix entitled Delivery Plan Overview. We are continuing to review our approach, and we plan to add some more contextual information to the data displayed on the dashboard. So instead of just having the figures, we'll try to interpret what that actually means. We would also intend to provide a snapshot overview of all year one delivery plan projects, including a RAG status. So as well as a little bit of textual update, you'll see a red, amber, green, or indeed a blue for complete. So it's actually a BRAG status as opposed to a RAG status. So that would hopefully give some assurance over how we are performing against delivery of all of the projects in year one. And we hope that you will see that new format of reporting at your February committee. So happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's always a challenge to get the visuals quite right to satisfy all readers, but I think that will be particularly helpful to have the overview and to have the structured way of checking and interpreting what's happening with the strategic delivery plan. Anyone have any questions on this item? John Tomlinson.
Yeah, sorry, not to disappoint you, Alison. There's just a specific one. I may not have picked it up quite correctly, but it's obviously a key pressure within the system and for us as well. So we've been doing reasonably well on delayed discharges. We're looking to try and build capacity and hospital at home up to 100 from where we are. Okay, so I'm picking that, and we're kind of at 20, next step 45, and going on to 100. Okay, so I suppose I was just trying to, it's my old thing about modelling as well, which is for the whole system, you know, the city can be doing its bit. There may be pressures elsewhere. Is the 100 going to do the job? And if it's hospital at home, are there other aspects of delayed discharge that aren't getting picked up? Because hospital at home is just one, you know, it's quite a lot of care around people. There's also people getting stuck elsewhere. So what are we doing for them? So it's just to get that picture of, in terms of our performance, is it going to be enough even at that figure for hospital at home?
Thanks, John. So first of all, in terms of whether it's enough or not, I can't answer that at this moment in time, but what I can say is we are doing some modelling. So one of the other projects in the dashboard, in the delivery plan, is to understand what our bed-based requirements and we refer to hospital at home as having beds. So we're doing some modelling there for our needs between 2023 and 2030. So that project is ongoing at the minute. So that should hopefully answer the question. Not only is that enough for hospital at home, but what other bed base we need in other areas. But you're absolutely right, hospital at home is only one aspect of what we're working on in terms of delayed discharges. We're also working on creating additional capacity in social care, both in residential care, interim beds, and in care at home. So there's a Grampian-wide project looking at that just now in terms of social care sustainability. So each of the 3 health and social care partnerships are looking at one particular aspect of that increase in capacity. Aberdeen City are looking at the increased use of technology-enabled care. Aberdeenshire are looking at risk-assessed care, and Moray are looking at discharge to assess. So all of these should hopefully speed up delayed discharges and also create capacity to get more people flowing through the hospital.
Okay, that's really helpful, and I know others want to come in on this, but the way I'm seeing it is that if we can see that picture for ourselves and even across the system for Grampian, because until we can get a grip of that, then we're not going to be able to do what Luann was saying, which was really protect the prevention work, because all the money and the concern will be piling into this issue unless we can try and get on top of it. So that's really good to hear. I'm really pleased and would look forward to that. I'm not going to be here myself, but I'll maybe see it from a different place. So that's welcome. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, John. And just to give assurance, that work is ongoing at the same time as the other work is ongoing. So our Stay Well, Stay Connected programme, all the work that our public health coordinators and our health improvement officers and our wellbeing team are doing in the communities around about the prevention agenda, that continues.
Thanks for that. Sandy, are you coming in on this point?
June was before me. I am, but
Okay.
June was before me.
Okay, June.
I want to pick up a point, but it's not in relation to what's just been discussed. If Sandy wants to go first, thank you.
Okay, thank you, June. Thank you, Chair. I guess I was going back to the delayed discharge bit and a discussion earlier about, celebrating, to give you some assurance, but also to celebrate. So some of us, including Martin, Alison and I, take turns on being senior manager on call, and we go to Grampian daily system meetings more than you'd like to tell you, kind of thing. So the last couple of days I've been there. So I go to a Grampian system meeting, and on Tuesday, because we're keen to kind of highlight a positive narrative, I checked with social work colleagues, and in Aberdeen on Tuesday, sorry, in ARI on Tuesday, there were 5 Aberdeen residents that were delayed discharges. So it's not 100, it's not 200, it's not kind of what people might perceive to be the issue. Now at that meeting, I'm not saying everybody agrees with me when I say this next statement, but I then say, so delayed discharges is not the biggest problem in the health and social care system. People might debate that, but that's a factual number, 5. So I think I would partly giving you that for assurance, but mainly to celebrate the work, and I don't think they're on the call, of our social work colleagues. I mean, it's not just them, but if I just particularly highlight them, they are on top of delayed discharges like a total rash. They're also assigning and aligning people ready for discharge, absolutely on top of that too. So I think I'm not diminishing the issue about lack of social care. That's a different issue. But in terms of delayed discharges in Aberdeen Royal Infirmary on Tuesday, it was 5. And the last 2-3 times I've asked, it was like 9 and 10. So contextually, it is not delayed discharges in Aberdeen Royal Infirmary that is the problem, in my opinion. Others can disagree, and they probably do, but that's a kind of factual number.
Okay. Thanks for that. So, it sounds to me as if we need a bit more. We need a bit more detail around the narrative that we have. Is there something missing in how we're presenting the information, or that's a question for us to think about. Thanks for that. June.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just introduce myself, and apologies for being late. I'm June Brown, Executive Nurse Director here at NHS Grampian, and this is my first time at the Risk and Audit and Performance Committee. Alison, thank you for the paper, and I just wanted to ask a question about the dashboard itself, and this might be a daft lassie question, so I'm just going to call it out before anybody else asks. So the data that's presented here really is around about numbers. There's nothing really about quality of what's going on until we move down to keeping people safe at home. And that data then is talking about the inpatient services round about SOARS. So that's not really people's homes. So I was just curious about why it was under that heading. And also in mental health, equally, it's about bed occupancy, and it's not about achieving and fulfilling healthy lives. So I'm just wondering if the measures that are here are the right measures. Are there any other things that we could be doing differently around that? Thank you.
Thanks, June. Yeah, in terms of home, the full extension of the keeping people safe at home, as it's related in our strategic plan and indeed in the delivery plan, is keeping people safe at home or in a community setting. So the keeping people safe at home title, if you like, is an abbreviation of that. So that's why we include SOARS, if you like, in terms of Woodend Community Hospital would be home or a community setting. And sorry, the other one was your other question was?
Just curious, what's presented is all about occupancy. So the mental health one, for example, is about achieving and fulfilling healthy lives. So occupancy of the wards doesn't really measure that, if you know what I mean. And I know Falls doesn't have anything against it. It's obviously something we have a lot of data on. that could be shared. And just curious about what the next steps are around that to try and understand that as it's set out.
Yeah, sorry. So all of our mental health, the achieving fulfilling healthy lives is about addressing inequality. So that's why all of our mental health reporting comes under that heading, because it's looking at that inequality aspect. And you're absolutely right in terms of the falls data. The falls data is there. We just haven't managed to pull it through into the dashboard yet, but hopefully we'll get that sorted for the next iteration.
Okay, happy with that, June? Great. Luann?
Thanks. Just a few comments from me, not being a member of this committee, but I hope that's okay, Martin.
Oh, yeah. Totally, absolutely.
So just on June's point, just for assurance for June, that the Clinical and Care Governance Committee just met this last week and looked at falls and looked at all the quality aspects of what's happening. So there is more focus on that in the Clinical and Care Governance Committee. I think I just wanted to comment on the discussion about delayed discharge. And for me, what delayed discharge data does is gives us a bit of a window into the pressure in the whole system. So I don't see that as something that's right, we need to sort that out on its own, but it's actually a window into the whole world of health and care. And if there's high numbers sitting there, that suggests that there's pressure elsewhere in the system. So for me, that's the importance of that data. And I suppose as this report develops, the key for me is the narrative and how we're taking that window in and then explaining underneath it, these are all the different things that we're doing to help the flow in the whole system. And actually that's just an indicator of how the system feels. So maybe there's a bit of work for us to do, and Alison, we can give some thought to where best to do that about what's in this report and how we tell the story, really, because it is that whole system approach that we're interested in. So yeah, we can come back to that. I just had a specific question about the hospital at home, and it mentioned alternative models being trialled around that, noting that there was a high absence rate, and I wondered what that was. That a different model for hospital at home? I think it was talking about having less consultant cover. So just wanted to hear a little bit more about that specific one. Thank you.
Thanks, Luann. I'm not sure I can give you exact specifics on that, but I do understand it's about the skill mix within the team, and looking at perhaps other grades of staff and allocating duties around appropriate to skill mixes. But but that feeds into the conversation that we had earlier on around about recruitment and our ability to recruit to certain posts. So yeah, it's just constantly under review, and the team do work closely with the hospital and with social care staff, etc. So it's just finding the right balance around about what in response to patients' needs.
Thank you for that, Alison. Sandy.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to give a wee bit of quantifying some numbers, backing up what Alison said there. I think I can recall recently, because nearly every day hospital at home we're kind of asked about it. I can recall recently, for example, I think that the capacity, the number of people it could support was about 20 beds. And at that point, I think I remember hearing discussions about the need to couldn't get a doctor, to get a locum doctor in order that basically the capacity could go up to Y, and I think it was like 30 or 35. So there's a direct correlation in the current kind of model, I think, that says you can do X amount of capacity with Y doctors and 2X with 2 doctors, and recognising this is now what this is not quite how probably the team would describe it, but clearly if doctors is our biggest shortage, there's a kind of issue there. So it really did relate to trying to increase the number, but very recently there was no doctors and it was kind of much reduced capacity. And I think that kind of the organisation, the whole NHSG, was kind of having to ponder, well, if we want hospital at home to increase significantly and treble to what it is today, where are we going to get these doctors from to support that? That was kind of so Alison's right, it's just some numbers, but that was recently that kind of uptake was in doubt, if you like, because of the lack of doctors.
Thanks for that. It was a good discussion. Okay, shall we move on? Are happy to note that report. Yeah, and then we can move on to 7.2, the annual performance report.
And that's me again.
It's yourself, Alison. Yes,
Yeah.
thanks.
Thanks. So the annual performance report has already been reported to IJB. It's before the committee this morning to provide an opportunity to consider whether any further scrutiny is required. Section 3.7 on the report refers to performance within the annual performance report, which may be of note. In other words, that it's either on an upward or downward trend, and how it compares with Scottish or the comparable Scottish average. So there's a number of points there. I'm not sure if committee wants to focus on any one in particular, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you for that. There is an enormous amount of information there. Very well presented, very structured. Yeah, and there's quite a mixed picture of what's been going on. Does anyone have any particular questions that they would like to ask, or any comments about the performance report? John Cook.
Yeah, it's really around the premature mortality figures, in that the fact that our rate is increased at double the rate of the Scottish average is a worry. But as you say in the report, we've got the seminar on population health, which should help us to understand in more detail what is a very complex issue, and multifaceted, lots of different issues. And although we're getting worse than we're getting worse more quickly than the Scottish average. If I look at the table on page 145, in absolute terms, we're still below the Scottish average, which absolutely isn't a cause for complacency. We should definitely be looking at this. So yeah, that was it really, a comment rather than a question.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. John Tomlinson.
Yeah, really just a comment. I think it's very well presented. I think so. Just interested in thinking about the audience of this, and we have to produce an annual report. It's like who's going to read it, and I'm asking that from the point of view of what influence we can have, because it's about public expectations and how we're trying to influence that as well. So I'm just intrigued what happens with this. We've certainly done the job. We've done it very well, I think, in terms of what you guys have in terms of your presentation, and demonstrating the link to the strategy. I'm just interested in what happens to this now.
Good question.
Thanks, John. So certainly it has been published on the website. That's the main thing that has happened with it already. But you're absolutely right in terms of whether folks read it or not. And this has been the subject of a fairly lengthy discussion at the strategic planning group, where our locality empowerment groups are represented. So obviously our community representatives, and funnily enough, we had settled on that sort of very visual and colourful mode of presenting the information with our communities and the public in mind, thinking that was something that they would perhaps prefer to see. But strangely enough, the comment from our locality reps in particular were that they would rather see more tables of information, you know, rather than that colourful means. So we have been thinking that for next year's report, we may well do something similar to what we did with the strategic plan itself, and produce a couple of different formats based on what the audience might like, and I think what might be more it might be more useful is to sort of maybe try and drip feed some of the key messages through our comms routes into the press, etc. The press tend to pick up on the bad news stories, but you know, if we can use some of that information in the annual performance report to really shout about some of the successes that we have had, that might be a better way to do it. As you quite rightly point out, we are required, it's a statutory obligation that we actually publish an annual performance report. So we will still have a document that's published, but we'll maybe think of other ways that we can perhaps get that information out to folks in an easily digestible format, because I can't even remember how many pages there are in the annual performance report, but it could be a lengthy read if somebody was reading it from start to finish.
Okay, well, thank you for that, and thanks. If I can just say, Chair, that it's good that you're on the case for how we use the information and communicate it. So that's welcome. I see Graham Lawler's on the call here. I was going to say, always remember that journalists can be very lazy, and that if you give them a good piece of information they can just publish, then they'll tend to do it. But apologies to Graham there.
Yeah, I mean it's a very it's a very well prepared presentation with a nice mixture of graphics and quite concise information. I think it's quite public facing. It is quite accessible, but I suppose the drawback is that there is a lot of information. There's an enormous amount going on. So summarising the whole landscape of activity, I think that's a bit of a challenge. But I think Graham Lawler is going to add something. Graham.
First of all, John, thank you very much for your apology. You do know full well I was never a lazy journalist, by the way, but never mind. I can certainly work with Alison to think about various formats in which we might put this out in simpler and shorter form, just with the caveat that certainly what Alison said was right. We could pick and choose the highlights, put that into a press release, stick it to the press. It would guide the press to the document, and the press would be likely to, okay, cover the highlights, or what we choose as the highlights, but would probably turn it upside down, and some of the lowlights might very well end up as the headlines and the intro and the following paragraphs. That's my contribution.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, it's very hard to predict what is going to be seized upon. But yeah, it's an excellent report, I think. Luann.
Yeah, interesting discussion on the media, and I suppose for me, I'm listening to that and thinking, well, what is it we're wanting to achieve by putting stuff out to the media and by sharing this report? And for me, this is about building the story and the narrative about how health and care is changing, how the public can expect what to expect when they need health and care. So to me, that's the consistency of the message. And if we can use examples of how things that have worked well to demonstrate that different, how things will be different when people access health and care, that would be the primary purpose, because we know that a lot of the what's the word, challenge from the public because they don't really understand why things are different and just want to phone up and get their GP like they did 10 years ago. So the more we can weave narratives and interesting case studies in to help people understand why things are different, and that different is not necessarily bad or less good than was there before. I think that would be the primary purpose of trying to use this report for that reason. But I totally agree with Graham. There is always a risk, and whatever you put out there, that a different angle is taken for sure. The reason for raising my hand was just a sort of closing the loop thing. So when we spoke about the mortality rates, on the 3.73 that John Cook had mentioned, absolutely we're going to have the population health input, but I think Phil was going to do a specific piece of work just on that data, just to sort of so that we could put that to one side and understand that yes, that data makes us, there's questions there, but I think he was going to do a bit of a look into that. Am I right? Alson's nodding. And I think that might help settle people to be able to focus on the population health work and just have that question answered as to it's maybe a city thing or whatever that causes that number to be high. And I think, Alison, you'd also shared these numbers that we're talking about are actually very small. So I think I would welcome just having that piece of work done so that that particular question is closed off. Obviously mindful that Phil's probably not even at work at the moment, but I think if we could just make sure that that's noted, that we are doing that specifically. Is that okay, Alison?
Okay, any other questions or comments? Can we note the annual performance report? Thank you. From the agenda, there is no exempt or confidential business, so therefore we move on to the final item, which is next meetings. There's a schedule of meetings. Next meeting is 28th of February. I think all of this has been agreed in advance, so hopefully we all accept that. Great, thank you. It's been a very, very positive meeting. Thank you everyone for contributing. And I think we've come to the end of the meeting. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Bye.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks. Cheerio.
Yeah.